Good afternoon, everybody. This is Therese Brown at the Association of Catholic Publishers. We are about a minute before our webinar today starts with David Hetherington. So if you want to get yourself settled, your coffee, your drink close by, we are going to have a fairly brief presentation actually, and then more conversation. So this is going to be a more engaged webinar than perhaps others that you have participated in before. So keep track of your questions and comments. As we get ready to begin, I'm going to welcome you all again. It is time to start our Tuesday webinar. And this is David Hetherington, who'll be our speaker this afternoon. A couple of housekeeping details. This is going to be a more engaged webinar than probably what you're used to, in that David really likes to initiate a conversation and a dialogue with folks. So please keep your questions and your comments close by. What we're going to do is I want to test something. We've not done this before. Could everybody that is attending so far, could you click on the raise your hand button? I want to see if that's going to work for us, so that I can actually bring people into the conversation. So if you see that, raise your hand. I see Greg. I see a couple. Anybody else? Okay, raise your hand. Okay, so thank you. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, so once we get through the presentation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you have a comment or a question, and I will unmute you so that you can actually be a part of the conversation, and we can record this as a dialogue rather than me just reading your comments and questions. So hang on to those, put those aside, and we are going to turn to my friend David. I'm going to share my screen and show you his presentation. So let me get that. Okay. There we go. Very good. Okay. So David, why don't you introduce yourself and we can get started.
Well, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time and kind attention today. It is a pleasure to be part of this conversation on a subject which I think I hope that you will all find of some value to you. By way of background, I have been in the book business for 4 decades. It is my second love. My first love is my wife. Actually, it's my third love. My second love are my Basset Hounds, and my third love is the book business in whatever form it happens to be. Hopefully, you'll find our conversation to be of some value to you. I would encourage you to make sure that this is a conversation and not a lecture. And I will do my best to make sure that this does not come across as a sales pitch. And with that said, Teresa, if we could go to the first slide. Okay, so our introduction, all right? So third-party distribution has been a fixture of the publishing landscape for decades. In the 40 plus years I've been in the business, it's been available to publishers to varying degrees. I think that what I can say with complete confidence is that in the past 10 years, the value of it has really taken off. COVID-19, the supply chain crisis has accelerated the interest in this alternative to the traditional distribution model, as well as the expansion of the distribution network, the partners that are now available to publishers. When I first got into the business, there was really only one way to sell books, and that was through a bookstore, and the advent of Amazon and other distribution channels has changed that materially, right? Second point is that the definition of third-party distribution is situational and depends on the individual publisher, right? At minimum third-party distribution means order picking, packing, and shipping, but some publishers have decided, with good reason, I think, that they want to expand the range of the services that they would like to outsource. Some of them outsource sales and marketing services. Others include the order to cash and customer service. But the basic is that any third-party distribution should at minimum include pick, pack, and ship. And in some cases, you may want to consider dealing with a provider who also has on-site manufacturing services. Next slide, please. So why is the increased interest? I think we need to go back one. Okay, so the traditional distribution model of publisher managed warehouse involves significant fixed costs, which requires a predictable level of activity to support full cost absorption. In other words, if you don't have product going out the door that you can bill, right, you still have to deal with the cost of the rent, the utilities, some amount of personnel, the fixed costs for leasing equipment and things like that. When you go to the third-party distribution model, much of that goes away. So you don't have to worry about your volume. If your volume declines, having to deal with large fixed cost charges, right? COVID-19 changed the rules here. Many of the changes, I believe, are permanent, but the degree of change remains to be seen. First was Amazon's temporary exit from the business of books, which I think several publishers can attest to the fact that they appear to have exited the book business again over the past 3 months. Acceleration of marketplace relationships as an alternative to Amazon, where the publisher actually has a marketplace position with Amazon rather than depending entirely on Amazon to sell the product. There is a dramatic increase, I find, in publisher focus on cultivating B2C relationships with their readers with the associated benefits. The associated benefits being, number one, that you keep the margin that you might otherwise give to Amazon, and that you collect the names and relationships of the company, of your consumers, which adds inherent value to your company. So that at some point you decided that you wanted to sell the organization, the value of the company increases when you have those relationships in place, not something to be discounted too heavily. And the final point is the increased interest in digital delivery and ebooks. This I put under the rubric of the 3-year theory, which essentially means that in sort of the in 12 months with the pandemic, 3 years of change occurred in that same 12-month period that would have normally taken a much longer period of time. So dramatic events in a relatively short period of time. Next slide, please. Okay, so why is there, what is the interest behind outsourcing? Number one, outsourcing provides undeniable cash management advantages. You don't have to invest in the warehouse, you don't have rent, you don't have any significant expenses that are fixed and yours to manage alone. The second thing is that outsourcing makes the bolt-on of an acquired property easier, so that if you were to buy another list or something, you can fold it in, which may not necessarily be the case if you have your own warehouse. Third point, businesses with outsourced services, particularly fulfillment and technology, and in technology, what I'm talking about there is cloud-based technology, are viewed as more attractive acquisition and merger candidates because they're simply easier to work with without, again, the burden of fixed costs. Constant theme whenever we talk about outsourcing to a third-party distributor is the idea here of eliminating fixed costs and moving to a variable cost business model. And the fourth piece is that when combined with a co-located manufacturing, the upside of outsourcing increases, right? It allows the publisher to accelerate transition from the traditional model, print first, sell later, to a sell first, and then print later inventory model. It shortens your supply chain and it has the potential to reduce your inventory new standing inventory because of shorter manufacturing lead times. Think about the time that you consume if you look at a traditional business model, which is print the books in location A, ship the books to location B. There's a lot of acceleration that's possible when you put the two under one roof. Right? You take out that intermediate time, it creates a whole raft of benefits that should be given weight as you evaluate your supply chain. Next slide, please. So post-pandemic considerations, not to be discounted at all. Number one, and if there are any folks on the call here who are in the warehousing business, right, the availability and retention of labor and increasing labor costs. The increase in energy costs, right, because we're all dealing with higher energy prices. Even though the cost of gasoline is coming down, energy is still significantly higher than it was this time last year. The impact of inflation on revenue reliability. Let us not forget that many people do not have that extra cash in their pockets that they had that was generated by pandemic funding. That inflation is eating into everybody's pocketbook. So the availability of disposable income, the potential reluctance for people to spend money without a clear return on investment is significant. And I think we should not underestimate the impact of inflation on our revenues. One of the things I am particularly concerned about is the recent information from the the American Association of Publishers, which reported a 12% increase in year-over-year revenue from 20 to 21 for the publishing industry as a whole. That's great news, and I'm delighted to hear it. But I also think that we're in a situation right now where we need to reset expectations, and I would be quite surprised if that continues. Rising interest rates, everybody is subject to that. I think that the Fed's actions, while maybe necessary to fight inflation, are clearly going to make cash more valuable and important to hold on. Uncertain channel relationships. I don't know about the folks on the call, what you've been dealing with Amazon, but I can tell you that many of our customers have seen their Amazon business in July, August, and September plummet dramatically, and similarly with Barnes & Noble. So I think we need to be mindful that the past is not necessarily an indicator of the future. Freight costs are still high, although they are improving, and schedule reliability for freight is a challenge. And then, of course, we have supply chain vulnerability, right? Paper cost and supply, the capacity of the manufacturing operations in the United States, and growing interest in onshoring manufacturing. Publishers are bringing manufacturing back from Asia, and there will be more demand for a very limited set of potential suppliers. Next slide. Anybody have any questions so far or concerns that you'd like to raise? Please.
If you have any questions, just raise your hand and I can turn your microphone on and you can share that directly with David.
Okay.
I don't see anything right now, so why don't you keep going, David?
Okay, all right. So let's look at a comparison of the traditional distribution model and the outsourced model, right? So with a traditional model, you have a fixed real estate cost. That's whether you own the warehouse or you rent it. With outsourced, you don't have that. With traditional, you have ongoing investment in technology, whether it's a warehouse system or material handling equipment. When you outsource, you don't have that technology investment. You have staffing costs with your own, when you have your own captive operation. That disappears when you outsource, right? You have high fixed costs for traditional, but with outsourcing, you have pay-as-you-go fees. Recruiting challenges, we talked a few minutes ago about the labor situation. That is not your problem when you outsource. It becomes the provider's problem. You have time and process opportunities on outsourcing that you don't necessarily have in traditional. right? You have uncertain cost recovery in traditional, right? We talked about absorption. If you don't have the volume to allocate all of the costs to cover all of your costs, you have underabsorbed, and your warehouse costs really can go up dramatically as a percentage of sale. With the outsourcing, you have economies of scale that are otherwise not available. In traditional, you have modest economies of scale, right? Your traditional costs are typically unpredictable. And in the outsourcing model, they become much more predictable depending upon the cost model that is used. Typically, you may or may not be familiar with this, but some providers have what I would refer to as a menu of charges. So there's a fee when the books come in. There's a fee when the returns come in. There's certain activities each have a specific fee. And if you have any familiarity with warehouse operations, you know how difficult it would be to predict those. Other operations use a percentage of sales model, so that the provider asks for a cut of the sale, which makes your budgeting much easier. So for argument's sake, if you have a $10 million business and the provider asks for 7% of sales, you know that in that $10 million, you're going to be paying $350,000 for your outsourcing costs. When you go back to the traditional menu model, it's not quite as predictable. And I've seen it, having worked with operations both ways, that sometimes the surprises can be unsettling, to put it mildly. And the traditional burns cash, and the outsourced conserves your publisher cash. Next, please. Okay, so when you outsource, these are the considerations that I would suggest you want to take into consideration. Number one, it is not without risk. The degree of risk is a function of the breadth of the activities outsourced. Recall that when we opened up today's presentation, we talked about it could be sales and marketing, it could be order to cash, at minimum it would be pick, pack, and ship, and it could be manufacturing. So the broader the range of services that you outsource, the more complicated it can be. One of the things that some publishers have done successfully is to stage the outsourcing. So they start with pick, pack, and ship, and then they may add order to cash, and then they may add sales and marketing, and then they may add book manufacturing, or they may do sometimes simultaneous activity. But again, the more you put on the transition schedule initially, the more complicated it becomes. The timing is crucial. You must give yourself enough time to make sure that the system or the outsourcing relationship is in place and has been thoroughly tested before your primary selling season. If you're in the trade business, you would not want to do this right before the Christmas holidays. If you're in the academic business, you would want to be up and running well before the academic season starts, typically in July, in the summer months. So again, you got to give yourself enough time, right? It requires careful transition planning and dedicated publisher resources and a clear communication of expectations to your provider, right? You need to put things in writing. You need to dedicate resources to this. You want this responsibility to be assigned to some of your best people. This is not something, outsourcing is not something to assign to someone that who is on the way out the door, to use the rubric that sometimes comes up, special projects director. That is not what you want to do. That is a prescription for failure. There are one-time costs, cash and non-cash, associated with moving from owned to outsourced. So number one, you have inventory transfer costs. You have the write-off of inventory if your reserves are inadequate. The one thing I urge you not to do is to move dead inventory, right? If it's not going to sell in your current warehouse, it's not going to sell in the new warehouse. You may have severance expense to deal with the employees that you let go, and you have the write-off of unamortized capital. Some of them are cash, some of them are non-cash, all right? So the first one, inventory transfer, would be cash. Write-off would be non-cash. Severance would be cash. And I think that covers it. And then, of course, to consider the cultural impact on the organization. Some organizations, I have to say, have decided that they do not want to do this because of their concern for the employees who would be affected by the change. But the one thing I can tell you is that while that's an admirable notion, you need to consider the fact or the consequences of not doing it in a volatile environment. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's a list of outsourcing providers. Now, I want to say that this is a list of the larger companies that I typically run into, competitors, on a normal basis. There are some very capable specialist organizations who focus on particular markets. Several of them focus on the religious market. The fact that they are not on this list should not be taken as any indicator that I think that they are unqualified. They are in fact eminently qualified, and depending on your own particular needs and your organization's philosophy, I would urge you to consider them. So what I've done here is I've listed the organizations that I deal with on a competitive basis and the range of services. So a full service provider is someone who provides sales and marketing, pick, pack, and ship, order to cash, as well as manufacturing services. So that's Baker and Taylor Publisher Services. My own organization only does order to cash, pick, pack, and ship, and manufacturing. And others that you see listed here do a variety of different activities. And your choice of provider should be a function of the activities that you'd like to outsource. Okay. But again, I want to emphasize that this is just a partial list. There are some very qualified specialist organizations that I would suggest that you want to take a look at in the interest of thoroughness. Next slide, please. Okay, so managing an inflationary environment. I brought this into the slide. This is a new feature to this, and I thought I would bring it up because I think it's valuable for all of us to be aware of. In the current environment, one of the things I would urge you to do is to tune up your financial warning systems. Identify the key performance indicators that will identify a crisis in the making, right? What is your margin? What are your labor costs? What is your turnover, right? But you want to be able to identify those. You want to understand what are the key drivers for your business and be looking at them on a regular basis, perhaps more closely than you have been before. Okay. Second point is don't extrapolate 2021. Don't assume because you had a good year in 2021 that the party is going to continue. As I mentioned earlier, channel partner behavior is not in the publisher's favor right now. Inflation will compel consumers to be more mindful of their spending, and I predict that we will see a decline in the business year over year. Fifth, we want to maximize cash conservation and generation, right? So you want to hold on to whatever cash you can, and you want to generate as much cash as you can by collecting as quickly as you possibly can, as the old model saying goes, right? Collect early, pay late, right? You want to lay out potential downside scenarios and the countermeasures that you would take in advance of them happening. So if your business goes down by 10%, right, you do a forecast of what that's going to do to your profitability, and you decide then and there what are the actions that you would take if you have to contend with that. And what would you do if it came down 20%? What would you do if your Amazon business was cut in half? How would you contend with that? Think of those things now rather than wait for things to go wrong to do something, right? And again, a point I've raised at previous points in the conversation, right? While the AAP reports 2021 is a banner year for book business, right? There are clear signs that things are changing. Do not bury your head in the sand and think that we're going to have another great year, because I simply do not think that this is the case. Next. So some closing thoughts, right? Focus on your organization's core competencies. Is warehousing one of them? Does warehousing make you a better publisher? You are in the content business. You are not in the warehousing business. So Again, focus on the things that you do best. While historically there may have been some economies, I think that the situation has changed and the company's value and capabilities are much stronger if you focus on the core, right? Think long term. Do fulfillment services fit your strategic direction, right? If you're doing it yourself now, is it something you want to continue to do? Would exiting that business allow you to do something to capitalize on your strategy and other opportunities that are now being held hostage to owning your own warehouse? Number three, make sure you understand the provider's business model. Is it a service model, right, where you pay for individual activities, or is it sales-based, where the provider charges you a piece of the sale as part of their compensation? What's included, and more important, what's not? You might want to have them make up a sample monthly invoice, right, to confirm, what you can expect to pay. Another point, and I would not underestimate this at all, is do not make your selection solely on arithmetic. Qualitative considerations are critical. You may pay a bit more, but you'll get a lot more. You get what you pay for. Do not cheap out. Fourth point, customer relationships are valuable, especially as more publishers build B2C capabilities. Really think closely before you outsource your order to cash and customer service. That may be something which is a very strong point in your organization and you want to hold on to it. Okay. Next point, even if you're already outsourced, as your agreements come up for renewal, it's always a good idea to test the water and examine alternatives as your contract renewal dates approach, right? You need to do it early enough so that you can consider a change. But the fact that you've been with an organization for years does not mean that you shouldn't look at alternatives, right? Remember that fulfillment organizations are facing cost pressures with labor, packing materials, energy, transportation, and infrastructure investment. And so please be kind to your provider, right? We are not in this business. This is not a charity, right? We are in this business to make a profit, but in order to make a profit, we have to charge a reasonable price. And finally, remember what happened to the printers and the paper mills, right? Part of the situation we're dealing with is that the publishing community, and not necessarily the folks on this phone, but some of the larger publishers, put immense pressure on the book manufacturing community and paper mills, and we are dealing with the consequences now with increased costs, a drain on availability, and paper being a commodity of extraordinary importance. But the price increases that are coming through and availability issues are like nothing I've seen in the course of my career. And final slide. And in the event that you'd like to discuss any or all of this, I am available to you. Here's my contact information and my phone number. Welcome a conversation with you. Beyond that, I've authorized Therese to make the slides available to anyone who's interested. And with that, Therese, I turn the floor back to you and open the floor up for questions.
Thank you, David. Okay, so now we're at that time where questions and comments. If you would like to share a comment or you have a question for David, you can use the raise your hand function and I will unmute your microphone so that you can share that. If for some reason that's not working for you, feel free to use the chat and just let me know that you've got a question or a comment. So the floor is open. Anybody? Anybody?
I can't believe that I was that good. I mean,
Well, I do have a comment from Mike Pace, who said nice presentation. So thank you, Mike. That's
you're
good.
welcome.
That's good. Mateo. Okay, let me turn your microphone on. Okay.
So, hi,
There you go.
Hi, this is Mateo from City Press. I just want to ask you, if in your experience, like outsourcing, warehousing, and these kind of services, is it worth it only for like middle, big, publishers, or in your experience, it worked well also for smaller, publishers?
No, I think that I would say I think the smaller the size of the publisher, the more value that there is in the outsourcing. Right? I think that the smaller you are, the more you want to focus on the core of your business. And so I would say that we have, I'm familiar with publishers, who are in the $500 million range and more, who have outsourced their operations. I'm also familiar with publishers, in the $250,000 range who've outsourced their business. So I don't think that size should be, unless you're an extraordinarily large organization, right? Well, I think the task would be daunting. But I think if you're a small organization, I would encourage you to look at it. I think there's nothing but upside for you if you conduct the analysis properly.
And another couple of questions, David. One, when you talk about the fact that these providers can provide also sales and marketing beside book manufacturing or like shipping and handling, what are the specific tasks include in sales and marketing?
So the sales and marketing would include representing your product to the marketplace, right? Mm-hmm. So that if you needed someone to sell your product into select specialty stores or the museum community or to Barnes and Noble, that these organizations can represent, have other products that are complementary, that your product is a good fit for them. The concern that you should have with this is the publisher's bag going to be so big that you won't come out of it, right? So you want to feel comfortable that you're going to be adequately represented. You want to make sure that when you have this conversation, part of it is tell me how you're going to sell our product to market, right? This is what we do right now. When I say what we do is, if I'm in your place, I'm going to say, this is who we sell to. This is the kind of activity. What do you think with the product line you're going to be able to do with it? Okay. Don't assume that because you outsource it, they will necessarily do it better, right? You should look at it, right? But I think you should also look at it with a very particularly critical eye.
Thank you, David. And then a last question, like you said, one of the models for these kind of deals with service providers is that the provider charges you according to your sales, like a percentage of your sales.
Right.
In your experience, what's the average percentage in the marketplace out there that, or it does depend on the quantity of books that you ship? But if you can give me orientatively like a fork of a percentage.
I think to your point, I think you're absolutely right. It depends upon the product that's being sold. Right. Mm-hmm. So there is no average percentage. So as an example, right, if I'm selling a product, when in our business model, that's what we use. We use the percentage of sale model. So we have a census sheet that we ask someone to fill out. It's a one-pager that gives us some detail. And we know how much it costs us to ship an average book. We know how much it costs us, sort of our fixed costs for the relationship. So we go in and we try to recover that amount plus a margin, right? And we would do that calculation based on your revenue, the discount that you give, right? And the level of activity that you have. So if as far as shipping is concerned and fulfillment, a book is a book is a book. So if you're selling religious product, and let's say you have an average list price of $19.95, that's one thing, but it costs the same to ship a book that sells for $19.95 as it costs to ship a book that sells for $199.95. So I'm not going to ask for the same percentage on both books. I'm going to adjust my percentage based on the product that I'm selling. I hope I've made myself clear, but if not, please let me know.
No, it makes absolutely sense. Thank you, David. And actually, one last question came to my mind. Sorry if I taking all this time. But
Listen, I'm delighted. Nothing makes me happier than to have questions from an audience. Nothing
so I'm
depresses
pretty
me
sure
more.
it happens very often that the company has already a system in place for shipping and handling and producing invoices and that kind of stuff, right? So they come to you, for example, or to another provider. But what does it happen that you're going to change the system, or you're going to use the system that the company was already using in terms of?
It depends essentially on what you want to do, right? So if you come to the provider and you say you want order to cash services, right? Order to cash being customer service, the order takers, the invoicing, the billing, and the collection, then you would typically adopt the system that the provider has, right?
Mhm.
Because that would just make the transition easier. If you go with the pick, pack, and ship model only, right, then the provider should use your system, right? Because you're doing all of that order to cash work, right? You have the relationship with the customers, you issue the invoices, you collect the money, you issue the credits, right? So, it's either one is an option here, but the fact that you are outsourcing does not mean that you have to change your entire business.
I see.
But again, the point that I would make here is that in my experience, your relationships with your customers are extremely valuable, and
Exactly.
you do not want to discount how portable, you do not want to assume that they're always portable. You may be better off to hold those yourself, establish your confidence with the provider, and then think down the road about moving out.
Thank you, David. That was very helpful. Thank you a lot.
Thanks, Matteo. Other questions or comments from anyone? Raise your hand and I will come find you, Bob. Okay, Bob, let me open your microphone and yeah, Bob, you can unmute yourself, I think. Huh. Okay. Having some trouble there. Here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to unmute everyone. So if you're not going to be speaking, if you would mute yourselves, that would be great. Let me solve this problem, I think. Bob, can you try to speak?
You are on.
Yes.
Hi, this is Bob Burns, Paulus Press. I won't mention any names, but we have made a transition as of July 2021 to a third-party fulfillment company, and we've had very much good success with it. And Matteo or anyone else that wants to talk to a publisher, I know that David's been in the publishing business a long time, but if you want to talk to a publisher about his hands-on experience in making that transition, feel free to contact me at Paul's Press. I will say that it's been a very good experience for the press, and everyone is happy with the end result. So that's, and I have one other question for you, Therese.
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes.
There's a heads of house meeting, presumably at 2 p.m. today.
It's at 3 p.m. I'm not sure why everyone thinks it's at
2 or
2,
3
but it's
p.m.
3. Yeah.
Mark David Janis has not received any information or any link to that. I just texted Mike Raffio to see if he's initiating those things, but
No,
I
he's
don't know.
not. I am. I can send that to him as soon as we're
Okay,
done.
so he'd like to participate, but
Yep.
when you get off this call, if you could email him a link, that'd be helpful.
I can do that. Thank you, Bob. Thanks
And
for letting me
David,
know.
thank you for these slides. It's very helpful for people who ask me about third-party fulfillment, especially in light of the fact that we did a transition just a little more than 15 months ago.
Well, thank you, Bob. I can, speaking for myself and my competitors, they're very gracious of you to endorse us. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Anybody or comments? I don't see any more unless anybody has last minute things. I think we are probably done, David.
Well, everyone, thank you very much. Appreciate your kind attention, and I wish you a good day and a successful year. Take care of
Eh,
yourselves.
Thanks again, David. We appreciate you
Thank you,
being
David.
here. For everyone to know is this session will be available, recording after the session is over in about an hour to an hour and a half. It's available on YouTube at the Association of Catholic Press YouTube channel, as well as at the ACP website. That's catholicpublishers.org/webinars. So we hope to see you the next time. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.